Welcome to the Institute for Strategic Policy Solutions in person. It is so nice to have an actual audience of participants here. My name is Kimberly Jackson, and I'm the executive director of our think tank. Many of you all are old friends. The Institute was created by Congressman Bill Young as a way to create social, political, and economic nonpartisan discussions. And we are grateful that over this COVID year we have had our heavyweights leading us in Tallahassee coming to talk to us and share what they're doing and how they're advocating for us, and we're grateful for them to come and be with us today. So this is criminal justice reform. This is what we're doing. We do have a virtual audience. I'd like to thank them for participating as well. There's going to be a couple of changes which I'll get to after I introduce our panel. I'm honored to sit here with Judge Farnell. Judge Farnell is a graduate of Stetson, of which I am too. She has worked tirelessly as a judge. She's now retired, but most importantly, she's committed to equity and has been committed to helping people who have substance abuse have first, second, third, and sometimes fourth and fifth chances. And so we appreciate her advocacy in the community. She's going to be moderating the event this evening, and then after that I'll be taking questions that were pre-asked from the virtual participants and questions that you're able to ask as well. And then of course, our two senators are no stranger to ISPS. Senator Brandes and Senator Rouson participated in our legislative wrap-up, but we thank Senator Brandes for his tireless work. Of course, everyone knows that he was elected in 2012 and then consecutively in 2014, 16, and 18. A heavyweight for sentencing reform and judicial reform in general, and a true advocate. I don't know if anyone else watches the Florida Channel. I may be the only one, but I actually watch you all, and I'm always impressed with how you handle very challenging issues. And then finally, we have Senator Rouson, who again is a strong voice in our community and an advocate for tremendous change. Senator Rouson has worked tirelessly for substance abuse and equity and prison reform, and helps with the least of these, which is really important to have a voice. So we're grateful to have his presence here today as well. And so before I turn this over to Judge Farnell, this is new, so if it doesn't work, we're just going to be patient with each other as we all get out of our Zoom windows and come back to reality. But we're asking you to text SPC Seminole 776 to 22333 for our audience. And it's supposed to magically pop up here. And if not, we will answer all the questions or try to get to as many questions as we can regarding the questions that were pre-submitted. And with that, I want to thank you for your time, and Judge, thank you for coming this evening and for moderating.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to thank the college, and in particular the Institute, for inviting me here tonight to moderate. It's great to be here in person. I greatly appreciate all of you in attendance and those of you that are attending by Zoom. I look forward to a meaningful discussion with the senators here tonight. And most important, I think, is the questions that we're going to get from the audience and the people that are watching, and we'll hope to give them the attention that they deserve. In response. Tonight we have an opportunity to talk about criminal justice reform, and hopefully in that discussion we'll see that we're trying to promote public safety and also satisfy economic concerns of the community. Criminal justice has been near and dear and a lifelong passion of mine. In 1982, when I worked at the Public Defender's Office as an interviewer, the first time I was ever in the Pinellas County Jail, and watching people being incarcerated and going to state prison, our population, I believe, was 27,830 people. Nowadays, it closes in on 100,000, I believe, and I think that this last year there's been opportunity for people not to go to prison, where our numbers are down, but I expect it to go back up again. I'm very honored to be here with Senator Brandes and Senator Rouson. Senator Brandes, I have reviewed some of the things that you have done. I haven't watched the Florida Channel, but I looked at a lot of the papers that were submitted. There's a statement that you made, and I want to read it to the audience because I think it's very impactful and goes to the heart of the matter of criminal justice reform. I'm going to take a moment and read it, see if you remember this. There's not a comprehensive vision for what legislators want criminal justice and public safety to look like in the state of Florida. Bipartisan criminal justice reform has largely become the standard in other states. Our prison system is in crisis. Our Department of Corrections should be renamed the Department of Warehousing, because we don't correct, we just warehouse people. Can you take a moment and tell us how you really feel?
When I started working on criminal justice reform 5 or 6 years ago, and I remember the day that I got interested in it. I had just been put on a criminal justice panel. I'm not an attorney. I have no real background or history in the criminal justice system, but I was placed on this committee and asked to sit on the criminal justice committee, and I thought it was very odd that I was asked to sit on. But early on in the committee process, we're generally hearing kind of reports of things, what's going on in the committee process. And I remember hearing a story of a gentleman who was, there was just 5 of us on this committee, so it was very small, and we were downstairs in the basement, and I remember the Secretary of the Department of Corrections was giving us a report on lawsuits and other activities that had occurred in the prison system over the last year. And they told the story of a gentleman that they had taken out of his cell because he had acted out in the cell, and the corrections officers had placed him in the shower. They had turned the shower all the way up, left him in there for multiple hours, and left. And despite his cries and his screams, nobody came. And when they pulled him out, skin falling off, he had passed away. And I remember looking around the committee and seeing someone texting on their phone, somebody reading their computer. And I had this visceral reaction that I was on a plane at 30,000 feet with an engine out, upside down, and nobody at the controls. And so I began to work on this issue and just trying to understand how deep this hole went. And the farther I looked, the deeper it got. And the more prisons I had visited, the more I understood how we had multiple secretaries of the Department of Corrections, how largely it's not uncommon to go to corrections facilities where there's 1,500 inmates and 0 instructors, no teachers. That inmate idleness is really almost at an all-time high, that gangs are on the rise in the prison system, and that we have a multitude of challenges and problems. And that's largely because there was no vision. There's no overriding vision for us to be the best in the country at public safety. And if we made that commitment to be the best in the country at public safety, we would do all kinds of things differently. We would focus resources differently. We would look at the prison system in a different way and try to focus on outcomes, not inputs. We would have a criminal punishment code that in statute was focused on public safety and not as it is in statute, which is focused on punishment. And so I think, kind of to lay the groundwork for tonight's conversation, largely I feel that we have working on criminal justice system is like going to a house as a firefighter that's on fire, but every room's on fire. And you gotta figure out where to start. And so the place that I figured out where to start is to get on the radio and call for help. Because you can't do it all yourself. It takes time, it takes resources, and it takes us working together to solve this incredibly difficult problem, which in my opinion is the most challenging area of public policy in the state of Florida, given our current leadership paradigm. And so look forward to the conversation tonight, but really, Judge, that's kind of how I began into this process and really some of the challenges that I have come to recognize.
And I also think that we have a lot more challenges with an older population that's in the Department of Corrections or warehousing, as we talk about now. And I think the transition issue should be observed and acknowledged so that more resources are put in to help people come back into the community. And if we did that, I think that we would have a better recidivism rate than we do right now. But I greatly appreciate your comments. Senator Rouson, would you like to comment on this issue?
Well, I'll just weigh in, first of all, by thanking Senator Jeff Brandes, who's been one of the strongest advocates and allies in the Florida Senate on issues of criminal justice reform. And many of us have worked together in a bipartisan fashion to get things done, like real reform. And it was Senator Brandes that first impressed upon me the urgency of going to visit prisons, just pop up there and walk in and see what's going on firsthand. But he's right. There's a mindset that we need to change. In fact, one of our colleagues, Senator Jason Pizzo, filed a bill this year to change the name of the Criminal Punishment Code to the Public Safety Code. And just that minor change might have started the avalanche of real change in terms of not warehousing people. The bill made it through 2 Senate committees but died in its 3rd committee, and that shows the difficulty of trying to get even simple things done in Tallahassee.
There's also a thought that if some of our elected officials and some of the people in Tallahassee, and I'll even say this, since I'm retired, some of the judiciary, if they would visit a prison and see what our prisons are like throughout the state of Florida, my philosophy was if I was going to send somebody to prison, I wanted to see where they went. And there's so many people that don't take advantage and maybe don't want to see what we're doing or not doing in the great state of Florida. So I appreciate that. Senator Rouson, I also reviewed some of your work in this legislative session. And I also have a statement that really was impactful when I read it to me about what's important to you, one of the things that's important to you. And you said there may be some concern that this bill does not go far enough. We should tell the world, keep watching. And that was as to what we're trying to do in this state for police reform. Would you like to comment on that?
Yes, and I meant what I said when I said keep watching. There needs to be police reform. In every institution, private or governmental, individuals bring their collective experiences, both good and bad, to the process. And unfortunately, there are bad police officers. And we know that a good officer doesn't want a bad officer standing next to him. A bad officer will get you prosecuted or even worse, killed. We tried to get some real reform with de-escalation techniques, banning chokeholds, duty to intervene. But all we could come out with in a bipartisan way in the legislature, because of the nature of the partisanship that goes on, was a bill that created new standards. It created opportunities for training, but this is House Bill 7051, but it didn't have any teeth in it for failure to comply. And I think that was a weakness in the bill.
All right. Senator, would you like to comment on that?
Look, I think I joined you all in agreeing that it didn't go far enough. That there had been previous bills that were filed, other bills that were similar, but that were much stronger, that could have been enacted. And I think it's important that we continue that charge, right? That we continue to advocate on that issue. Nobody's perfect. Law enforcement officers aren't perfect. There are good actors and there are people that misuse that position, just like legislators. And we should hold people accountable. And our job is to ensure that we're following best practices on a consistent basis. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with asking for best practices. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, look, we're going to hold you accountable if you don't follow what is considered a best practice. And I think that's what is so important. Did the bill go far enough? No. Was it a step in the right direction? Yes. Was it the best we could do this year? Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And I think when we're looking as a citizenry of arresting a 6-year-old child and the efficacy of that and the harm that it could do, that we need to continue to talk about it and not make it divisive, but how we work as a people, I think would be really, really important.
And the Kaya Roll Act, which passed with Senator Bracey pushing it, had the support of Southern Poverty Law Center, who came to visit with me today to talk about teeing up again this year real reform, and hopefully we can get somewhere. But even making a decision on what age you can arrest a juvenile was a difficult political decision.
Is there anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, we need to do better next year.
And actually, the two senators that are sitting, one to my left, one to my right, I believe that you will. I really do. What do you feel is important, what you're looking forward to as far as the assistance for our state in rehabilitation, substance abuse, restitution, things of that nature that may be important to the people that are sitting out here?
Well, I think when I think about criminal justice, the criminal justice system, I really think of kind of three buckets. The first being diversion, sentencing reform on the front end. That is by far the hardest area to work on in the Florida legislature. It gets the most attention of law enforcement, but we've had some success. We've done juvenile civil citations that is voluntary, but actually fairly heavily utilized in the state of Florida. And we're having incredible success with juveniles that they don't get an arrest record, they go into a diversion program, they have a civil citation, they're followed up with, and lo and behold, most of them never get back in trouble, and we're having incredible success. But then we go into kind of the middle portion, which is what happens in the prison system itself. And that is probably the second hardest area, because largely the problems there are problems of finance, of money, of underpaid corrections officers. For example, 40% of our corrections officers that start today will not be here within a year. 60% will not be here within 2 years. And so when you have a ever-changing, ever-evolving correction staff that's largely where you have prisons that have dozens of trainees that will only be there a few months and then they're moving on to another profession, it creates a system that is ripe for really the inmates to take over. Right. And whether it's publicly they take over or quietly, privately they take over, which is largely what happens. They will, they find young corrections officers who are only making a few $1,000s a month, and they'll say, hey, look, you bring me some cell phones, you bring me some drugs or whatever else in. You know what? Look, we can help you make more money. And that's how this process gets funded and how the process works, why we have tons of contraband in the prison systems now. So we take the middle bucket as well. And then finally, we have the third bucket, which is the reentry bucket. And to me, that's one where, again, Florida has, if it committed itself, could do radically more. Because today what happens is, once you leave the prison system, you get $50 in a bus pass. Nobody thinks that that's appropriate. Nobody thinks, given today's technology, given the ability to follow up, given the ability of faith-based organizations to desire to mentor, we know that the two leading factors, and Judge, I'm sure you know this better than I, but the two leading factors that kind of highlight somebody's chances of committing a new crimes are they going back to a stable family, and two, do they have a job? Right? If we can't control the family environment they're going back to. It's not, typically where the state gets involved. We can help. We can provide alternatives or proxies. We can tag them with a mentor to assist them, but we could also be training them for a job while they're incarcerated. A third of the people that are incarcerated in Florida's correction system can't read. They're functionally illiterate, and so we're not even meeting the minimum standards to get them literate while they're with us for sometimes decades. And then we release them and say, go do what? Go live under a bridge? Here's $50. And then we expect them not to commit new crimes? This is why you have to start with a focus. You have to start with a vision and a statement that's something like, Florida's going to be the best in the country in public safety. And we're going to make the steps necessary to do that.
And I'd like to add a fourth bucket, and that's called retroactivity. When you know better, you do better. And there was a time in this country when minimum mandatories was thought to be the answer to criminal offenses, but we have learned from that. In fact, on the Constitutional Revision Commission, of the 37 members, 3 of us were Democrats, and I was the only one to get a proposal through the commission on the ballot and passed by you, the voters. And that was Amendment 11 that dealt with retroactivity. We had already done something with third driving while license suspended offenses. We've reduced those from felonies to misdemeanors. But what about the 6, 7, 8,000 people walking around right now that would like a retroactive application of that because it might help them get a job if they don't have to list a felony on their record but can say a misdemeanor? So I think retroactivity is very important too.
In statistics, 87% support replacing minimum mandatory with sentencing range. 92% of voters are thinking that prison time for low risk or nonviolent offenses should be dramatically decreased. 94% of voters should offer more rehab and training in the prison system. And there's no reason that we can't address that and make that happen. Some of these prison sentences have probation on the end of the sentence, and there's a restitution requirement. If they can't get a job, they're back where they came from, which is another cell. Thank you.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I think, Florida has a combination, this kind of cocktail of policies that have disastrous outcomes. We have a standard 85% rule across the board, where it means no matter how much you change your life while you're incarcerated, you're going to spend 85% of your time behind bars. That means if you go get a GED, you get a master's degree, whatever you do in the prison system, nothing's going to change for you. You're going to serve that time. We have taken discretion away from judges with mandatory minimum sentences. Right? It's amazing because many judges are former prosecutors, and while they're prosecutors, we give them broad discretion, incredible discretion. Right? They can change charges, they can waive mandatory minimums, but all of a sudden they go from prosecutor to judge, and we take all of that discretion away. And I think but I think it speaks to the larger problem. That's not just a Florida problem. That's a United States. It's a U.S. problem. We no longer have a system of trials in this country. We have a system of pleas. And the reason that state attorneys love mandatory minimums is because it helps them get a plea. And as we recognize that they have no desire to really take this case to trial. Less than 3% of cases, I think, actually make it all the way to trial. We have a plea system in this country. I don't think the founding fathers would have wanted a plea system. I think they wanted a trial system. But over the years, we have created these processes that have that have changed us to a plea system. And then we've said on top of that, mandatory minimum sentences and 85% and no gain time, limited gain time and no parole. And so we have barred the door to all of the activities that would lessen the burden on the Department of Corrections and create an incentive for people that are in the Department of Corrections to actually change their life beyond simply getting out. Everywhere else in government, everywhere else in economics, we focus on incentives. We believe incentives matter. But in the Department of Corrections, we've removed the incentives. And that is what I find so challenging about the Florida system. Now, Judge, you were incredible at the diversion side of the space, right? Because you recognized that, look, sometimes the individual will take the plea deal. They don't care. They'll take the plea deal. They just want to go home that day. They've been in a cell all day long. They just want to go home. And they don't recognize that they're pleading to a felony. Right. And even if it's just credit time served and they're going to walk out the door, what you've done is tag them with a scarlet letter that will never go away. Right. And that's, again, another room in the burning house that we have to deal with is that conversation about how are we dealing with the front end? How are we focusing on diversion? How are we making sure that we're not that kids aren't making split-second decisions that when they goes to trial that's going to affect the rest of their life without being fully informed?
And I think the cost of incarceration is sky high. It's approximately about $25,000 a year on average, which a lot of times.
Right, for your younger inmates, it's about 20, in the 20s. For your older inmates, it's radically more.
Right. So I think that you've really hit it well when you say, why aren't we working on incentives? And 14 years in drug court taught me that incentives, if you want positive change, you dangle a carrot and you do incentives and use incarceration as a last resort. Obviously, there are some people that need to be in prison for a very, very long time. But when you think about our state has the third largest prison population in the country. There's something, and I like your suggestion of we can do better, and we will do better, throwing the gauntlet down. Senator, would you like to add anything to that?
Except to underscore the point, we need to give judges more discretion. We need to create more diversion programs that give people treatment and another chance rather than incarceration where they'll get no programs for rehabilitation. And this was a tough year for criminal justice reform in the legislature. It should have been an easy year with all that has happened because of the George Floyd murder, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, all of those things going on nationally and in our own state. But it was still a difficult year. It was the fight of the conservatives versus those who want more out of government.
I can't thank you all enough. I want to make sure that we have enough time for questions. Before we go to questions, I want to make sure the instructions that were given for texting to Poll Anywhere, that first you text to the platform and then you text to the number that's up here. So you mentioned some legislation that didn't go through, and I went through it all today. And I'm like, wow, I would really like to hear from you all's perspective what would have happened, what would have been possible. For example, if you had Senate Bill 328 go through, or Senate Bill, the Senate Bill 470 expunging records. There's so many. Senate Bill 1346. For our audience, felony settlement conferences, expunging records, minimum wage with felons, discretion, judicial discretion, retroactive changes. Can you talk about some of the sentencing and fairness and comprehensive reviews? Can you talk about what would have happened if some of this legislation would have been passed under your lens?
Well, I think the number one thing for me is that we would be able to focus our resources where we really need them. And that's the big challenge I see. Take one example. Let's take PRR, prior release reoffender law, where we say, look, if you've been released out of prison and you commit another crime within 3 years, you can be sentenced to life, mandatory minimum. So we have individuals who messed up when they were 17 or 18 years old, spent a year or 6 months in jail or prison, committed armed robbery, now they're going to prison for the rest of their life. And that doesn't take into account that character isn't static and people change. Now, had they done it 3 years and 4 months afterwards, that PR doesn't apply. But it really is all about us focusing our resources on the right place. If we had gone from 85 to 65, there would have been massive amount of resources be able to put back in the prison system. I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars that we could have allocated back to that system to make it work better. If we had done more on the diversion side, again, hundreds of millions of dollars being able to go back into there. On the juvenile expunging piece, that was a good bill that had been around for years. It made it to the floor multiple times. And the simple truth is, murderers and rapists don't get diversion. They don't get diverted no judge is going to offer somebody who a juvenile has committed a heinous act a diversion opportunity. They go to juvie, or they get sentenced. They get filed as an adult, direct filed as an adult. That happens all over the place. And so the concern that was stated in that bill, to me, I don't know of a good example of where that was really a problem. And so I think what you see, though, and what I think it highlights is there isn't a comprehensive vision. And if you come back to like, what's the foundation issue, that is it. And until we make a public statement that we're going to put public safety first in the state of Florida, and that we're going to be the #1 state in the country on public safety, and do all of the things that are necessary to do that, and put the resources in the right place, and use data to help guide us, and best practices to help guide us, then we're going to continue to slog through this malaise of a patchwork quilt of policy that doesn't really all work together, that doesn't work, because everybody's going to keep, it's the easiest thing in the world to just ramp up and say, well, they didn't get it when it was a misdemeanor, well, let's make it a felony. Or, boy, they really didn't get it when it was a third-degree felony, let's make it a second-degree felony. Right? Like we do all of these things just in a knee-jerk reaction without the thought of what are the long-term ramifications. And after decades of time where you've had legislators without a constant vision of criminal justice system, they have chipped away year after year at making incredibly long sentences that don't work, with an overburdened criminal justice system that can't handle the demand.
I get angry when I think about what did not pass, like some of the bills you mentioned that Senator Brandis pontificated upon. But I'm the eternal optimist. It took texting while driving 8 years to pass in the legislature. We will keep filing these bills. New people will keep getting elected. Leadership will change, and it will happen. We have to keep trying.
Thank you for that comment. We had a program on mental health last week with a host of people, commissioner, sheriff, public defender, and a judge from Miami. And I think the biggest outcome was that they said there were 70% of the system is for people with mental health and 30% is for other, and that we needed a system for the 30% and not the 70%. The judge from Miami really talked eloquently about having case managers and having other resources to triage some of the issues you talked about going in and out of the door. If you would make any comment on our space for mental health before I ask some of the questions from the audience.
Well, we need to do better. Are you referring to Judge Leifman?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I actually traveled to Miami, and I sat on the bench with him, and I observed him one afternoon handle mental health court. And they're doing a great job that needs to be duplicated all across this state. Mental health is a disease. It's an illness. It's not a crime, and we need to stop treating it as such.
Okay, well then I'm going to get to our questions, which are many, and thank you for your patience as I scroll on this new platform. The first question is, how important is it to undo the privatization of corrections in order to get real reform? To either one of you.
If myself or Senator Rouson end up in prison, we're going to want to go to a private prison. And I'm telling you that because the private prisons are air conditioned. The food's better. They're safer. Right? You go to a public prison, 85% of our facilities are not air conditioned. Most of them have no teachers, no activities going on. Private prisons, it's part of their contract. They have to provide a certain amount of activities, and they live up to their contract. So people sit here and knock on private prisons, and I understand why. I'm not supporting expanding the private prison role in Florida. But I'm telling you, if Jeff Brandis tomorrow had to go to prison, I would beg and plead to go to a private prison. Because I know I've been to plenty of public prisons, and I've been to the private prisons. The public prisons are, many of them are horrible, scary places. And the people that are in private prisons behave because they don't want to go to a public prison. And that's a radical concept to think about, but that's the truth.
Amen.
Easy response. So, of course, we're on our beautiful campus, and I want to thank our leadership for allowing us to appear here today. But what is one action a college campus and students can take to encourage reform? And along that line, do we need more lobbyists for criminal justice reform?
They can continue to do what many organizations and student-led groups are doing, and that is coming to Tallahassee. that is participating in the debate, engaging in the communication between them and the legislators who make decisions. We need to hear from you. And not just us who are allies, but those who are opponents of what we're trying to do need to hear from you. And I would encourage you to continue those things.
And I would just add, start in your own backyard. Start here. Go visit work with the Department of Juvenile Justice here and understand the challenges of the kids that are coming in. Go visit the prison here or the jail here and understand what activities that the college could be adding to help those that are incarcerated, because some are waiting for trial and they're going to be there for 2 years, and some they have gotten sentenced to 8 months and they need activities. They want to be productive when they leave. So I would say start in your own backyard before you work on the closest prison to us is Zephyr Hills. So that's a hike from here, but start in your own backyard and learn the problems locally, and then you can branch out.
And to piggyback on that, there's a saying recently that those closer to the problem are closer to the solution. And the gun violence that we're experiencing both in Pinellas and in Hillsborough is alarming. And these are young folks with these guns. Access and inability to judge the appropriateness of using them. That's one way to start in your backyard, talking to your neighbors, and searching your own house. They have to keep these guns somewhere. And if you have a 17, 18, 19-year-old living in your house and you're scared to search his room, he doesn't need to be living there. But that's what I would say in terms of starting in your own backyard.
And along that line, where are any current rehabilitation or workforce programs that exist for incarcerated individuals in Florida? And if we have any, are they effective in any way?
Well, we do have work release, but every year we try to provide incentives for businesses to hire ex-offenders, and every year we fall short. I think there was a bill this year that would have allowed, instead of a minimum wage being paid to an ex-offender, it would allow an employer to pay them less than minimum wage as incentive to get them working for this hard to employ population. You remember that, Senator Brandes?
I remember it.
It was not successful, and there was big opposition to it because one of the feelings was it was discriminatory on the basis of a person's situation of being an ex-offender. But we need to keep trying at that. We need to keep trying to find incentives and work opportunities.
Thank you. I'm trying to balance the questions between those that were pre-submitted. One is, what is being done in the prisons to prevent and treat prisoners regarding COVID-19?
Largely, they're following the CDC guidelines. Unfortunately, prisons are petri dishes of disease when it comes to a communicable disease like COVID. And so when some certain corrections officers would bring it in, or staff, or it came in via transfers, then all of a sudden it would go through the prison system like a wildfire. And I think largely now that we've got a vaccine that's obviously a lot more under control. But at the federal level, what they did was took your older inmates that were less likely to commit new crimes, your low-level offenders, and they sent them home. Mm-hmm. It was largely a policy that I think Senator Roussana and I would have supported. Put them on electronic monitoring, send them home for compassionate release, let them serve their time if they have a family situation that is appropriate there. But if you take all of these elderly, many of them were elderly that passed away in Florida's prison system. Clearly there's going to be some that have heinous crimes, and we're never going to do that. But there were other people that could have easily gone back home and served their incarceration on house arrest for a period of time until COVID passed, which is what the federal government did. Under the Trump administration, it did that.
As I sit here listening to you all I keep thinking about is communication. How are we communicating to the greater public these issues?
Well, we're trying to do them through forums at the Institute at St. Pete College,
Thank you, Senator.
as well as virtual town hall meetings and in-person town hall meetings, newsletters that we send out to talk about losses during session as well as victories during session. I know that Senator Brandis's office is open to constituent inquiries. We get calls all the time asking us what happened to this bill or that bill or what can we do, and just engage in the different levels of communication, email, snail mail. I still get about 5 letters a week from prisoners all over the state talking about their issues. We try to respond to every one of them. It's difficult, but it's a form of communication.
Some other participants want to know about if there were any discussion about qualified immunity over the past legislative session.
Nothing that really went anywhere.
So it also looks like, as we're scrolling through and talking to this, is that you mentioned why offenders reoffend because they don't have a support system. And they reoffend because when they leave and they don't have the talent or educational support to get new jobs, that becomes a problem. Are we working with the private industry and with municipalities to help them address these issues, since right now we're not giving them a lot to get support as soon as they get out of the system?
So it's an area where I'm going to be working this year. So I've worked on the front end system of the diversion and change the criminal punishment code. I've worked on the prison system itself. I've had some success a little bit in both, not nearly where we need to be, but step by step we're making some progress. But on the reentry piece, I think it's especially now because employers are having such a difficult time finding employees. They are recognizing that they're willing to look in places historically they hadn't been. And so whether it be the Chamber of Commerce, Association of Builders and Contractors, Department of Transportation, road builders, there is a workforce out there that's coming out of the prison system by the thousands that, if trained properly, if educated, could be productive members of society again and have a job the day they go out, they walk out of the prison doors. And to me, what we have to focus in on is how do we scale the solutions that work. So you're going to see from me this year, because we can't hire teachers in rural areas, a discussion about creating a division within Florida Virtual Schools that focuses on prisons, focusing on literacy, creating opportunities for individuals who are not going to get literate, like becoming barbers or other jobs where it's not as important potential. I mean, I'm not saying barbers don't need to be literate. Please don't take me out of context there. But we have to create opportunities for people to engage in jobs where we recognize that there are people that are not going to be able to do some of the other professions like electrician or plumber. But there's still ability to earn a living in their community. And to me, we've got to kind of have a multi-spectrum approach. And then we have to work with the industries that are engaged in Florida today, like the road builders, the contractors, to find those individuals in the prison system who are likely to have success and that want to engage in those activities and help train them while they're incarcerated, because we have them. So that the day they walk out having hopefully been reformed, but having a job.
I think that I'm okay to say that our college agrees. We have a workforce program. It's an incredible workforce program. As I often say, plumbers make a lot of money. And so we do have to revisit some of these professions that we're losing over time, that were traditional family professions over time, that are just leaving our population, which are important to the growth and continued sustainability of a community. So yes.
And I'm going to support whatever Jeff Brandis comes up with, not just because of it being a good idea, but because of my personal experience. After spending 9 years in 8 different drug treatment programs, and I came back to St. Petersburg, sleeping on the floor of an office downtown, nobody would hire me. And when they asked me, where have you been for 9 years, and I told the truth, drug treatment, they would pat me on the back and say, well, we're so proud of you. Someone's going to hire you, just not us. But Susan Cerruti, the county attorney at the time, took a chance on me and hired me at $17 an hour as a law clerk for 6 months, and I jumped at the opportunity to work again. And from there I rebuilt. But some company, some individuals need to be incentivized to hire this hard-to-hire population of people. And as a legislator, we need to be finding those companies and creating opportunities for them.
And Judge, I know you're not a panelist, but I see you nodding your head, so if you'd like to contribute.
A couple of weeks ago, my AC went down. It was a hard, hot week. And lo and behold, the young man that came to fix my air conditioning, in fact, put a whole new unit in, was somebody that I sentenced 25 years ago. He was 40 years old. He was 15 when I sentenced him. And to hear his story, and I called my friend that owned the air conditioning business, and I told him, and he goes, I knew that. When I sent him on your job, I knew he was nervous, but he's my best person. And that just warms your heart when you know the time that you've taken with somebody, all right, pans out, and they end up having this productive life with children. And he's the proud father of an IB student, a senior with, tons of scholarship offers to FSU and other schools. So it works. Incentives work. Believing in people when they don't believe in themselves works. And I think if we can just look at things a little bit differently, instead of the years of we're going to be tough on crime, we're going to be smart on crime. We're going to save money. We're going to save people's lives. We're going to build a better criminal justice, the best in the country. Right, Senator?
From her lips to God's ears. But got to bypass the legislature.
So speaking of that, there's a question about that. What criminal justice reform legislation, if any, do you believe has an above average chance of passing next session?
I would give it the same chance as this past session because it's an election year. And, some folks want bragging rights about being tough on crime as they mold their campaign platforms. But every year, something passes that you think might not have had a chance. And all we can do is continue filing them, talking to the leadership, talking to the chairs of the committees that they get reference to, having groups like you come up and support, contact these chairmen and tell them that this bill is important, it needs to be heard. And we just keep hope alive, like Jesse says.
Is there any effort to pass ban the box legislation so that people do not have to check the felon box when applying for jobs? I know some of our municipalities have adopted that, but overall legislation.
Not really. I mean, the research I've seen on it shows that if you have a ban the box policy, that sometimes people will discriminate based on names or based on race, as a kind of proxy. And so I think that that's a challenge. I'm much more towards the disclosure, but also let's let the state provide liability protection, so that people are, I don't think people should hide things from their employer, but I also think that we need to encourage employers to be more open and be more mindful about the types of employees that they do hire or they would consider hiring. Again, I go back to one of my friends in this process is a gentleman by the name of Sean Hopwood, who is a law professor at Georgetown, and has the most amazing story because prior to becoming a law professor at Georgetown. He wrote two not papers, but two arguments that were ultimately heard before the U.S. Supreme Court. And he did that on a prison typewriter, serving 10 years in prison in the federal system for robbing banks. And so what you recognize is character is not static. People change. And we need to recognize that as a state and put policies in place that are open to that concept so that we can look at employees in a different way. But I think we're starting to see a change there. Of the three buckets, the reentry bucket is the easiest one to work on, by far, because people are getting out anyways, and the legislature has less control there, but can truly help by offering incentives to business for us to look at hiring people. And especially right now, industry is desperate for talent.
We'll have our last question, and that is on restitution. Is there a way to make restitution based on a percentage of their income?
Not really.
Probably not.
No. I mean, like if somebody puts a gun to your head and steals your pearl necklace and it's worth $10,000, you expect a $10,000 pearl necklace to be restored to you, right? If they said, well, look, you make $8, you only make $8 or $10 an hour, we're going to give you a $2,000, or we'll give you a $500 pearl necklace, probably is not going to make you happy, right? And you're not going to feel like the criminal justice system worked for you. So it's hard. I think what we can do is, and it's something I think we did this year, which is allow a discussion about the fair market value of restoration of items and hearsay to be included in what the value of those items is, because before they couldn't look at what that you stole a car, what that car was selling for on eBay or something along those lines. They had to look at other values. So I think that will help.
And I want to thank Senator Brandis for leading the charge against the chair of the Appropriations Committee. I spoke in support of that amendment that will allow the second DCA to be built, hopefully in Pinellas County. Good work, Jeff.
Do you want to add any more comments about?
Look, this is going to be an interesting year going in. Obviously, it's an election year. I'm concerned that the criminal justice reform issues that we desire have a less likely opportunity to pass than things that we would absolutely be trying to kill and vote against, right? And so for us, it might be a defense here, not an offense here. But I think we always have to be willing to be on the offensive and have our policies in place that we can feel like we're moving forward on. But our real concern, my concern this year, is it's a very difficult year for forward progress on a lot of these ideas. But it doesn't mean we're not going to try.
Doesn't mean we're not going to try. That's the cry of Democrats in the Florida Senate.
And one Republican.
Sometimes the victory for us on this side of the aisle is in the debate, is in pointing out what we perceive to be fallacies in what's being filed and debated and voted on. Sometimes that's our only victory, and it's sometimes demoralizing when you pour your heart out and talk about going back home to your community of people and discussing with them why HB 1, the anti-protesting bill, passed. And how did you vote for 7051, the police reform bill that had been watered down? But like Jeff said, at least it's a start. And the Florida Legislative Black Caucus decided to support the bill at the end because we believed it's the foundation upon which we can build. We can't get everything. Sometimes progress comes incrementally in the legislature.
And to follow up on that, even when we pass things, sometimes pass them unanimously, they don't make it all the way through. right? And I think you can see that with the juvenile expunction bill. You can see that with the civic literacy bill. You can see it in a variety of a couple of other pieces of legislation that occurred this year. I think for us, it's how do we engage, how do we educate, how do we involve law enforcement? Right. This conversation isn't going to occur if law enforcement is engaged in the conversation. How do we get them to see and recognize the problem and find sheriffs and police chiefs who are willing to leave the pack and willing to stand up and say, we believe this is a real problem and it needs to be addressed. Because oftentimes there's a lot of groupthink that goes on, and no sheriff, no police chief wants to step outside that group. But what it's going to take is one or two leaders who are willing to step out and willing to advocate because they see the world a different way. And I think that's where we have to be able to and willing to have a conversation with law enforcement. We have to work with judges. We have to work with the social services side on the back end. But again, if we think of this as a house where every room is on fire, it's really all about calling in everybody and bringing everybody to the table to fight it.
And we need to support good policing, good law enforcement, and engage them in weeding out bad law enforcement. You know, when I was president of the NAACP in St. Petersburg, someone spray painted the NAACP headquarters, "No more popo. Popo, keep out. This is our territory." They were talking about police containment. And my response to that was to go buy a spray paint can, and I was going to go to their headquarters and spray some stuff on it. But my vice president said, "That'll get you arrested, Darryl." So we went to the NAACP and we sprayed over it. If you think the police department is our singular problem in the black community, then join the police department. Change it from the inside out. We asked for 50 applicants from the community, and we couldn't get one. But our officers are suffering today, the good officers. There's mental health issues going on with them, and we need to recruit better and train better recruits to stick around. So I think we need to do something about sending a message that we support good law enforcement.
Final comment.
Yeah, and the final comment for me is really, the most common argument that I hear from the law enforcement community is, look, we're at a 50-year crime low. Everything we're doing is working, and it's proven that we're at a 50-year crime low. Go look at how many states are in a 50-year crime low. Most of them. Most of them have policies that are radically different than Florida. Many of them have much better outcomes than what Florida has. And so I agree, we're at a 50-year crime low. That's wonderful. Can we do better and focus on and get better outcomes? Once we can get through that argument and say, okay, great, that's wonderful. Can we do better? It refocused the argument on the things that I think we can be successful on. And it's really all about putting the resources in the right place. We have a huge mental health problem. Massive. We're the largest provider. The prison system is the largest provider of mental health in the state of Florida. We have a huge problem with inmate idleness. We have a huge problem with lack of judicial discretion. We have a huge problem with over-sentencing. And we have a massive problem in that when people get released, there's nothing for them. We mark them with a scarlet letter for life. We make them disclose their felony status, and that affects their housing, and that affects their job prospects and everything else. We have to fundamentally reform the system. It isn't just one thing here, one thing there. But also we have to recognize that we did not get here overnight. This took decades. It's going to take decades on the way out.
I think that was well said, and I also think you need to covet what you said about your statement. Character isn't static, and people change, right? And so with that, we're going to end and say we never have enough time to go through all the questions you all submit, and these topics are in-depth and serious, and we ask that you continue to meet with our senators, talk to them, write them, email them. Hopefully they can stay a little bit for our audience that's present, but for our virtual audience, we have to close out. I want to thank you so much for coming today. We have 2 programs next week with the Institute. The program is with the City Council, which is next week, and the City Council Forum will be at the Allstate Center. And then our next program after that is right after with the Mayor's Forum. That's also at the Allstate campus. It's going to be hybrid as well. So we invite you to come in person or join us virtually. And thank you so much for supporting the Institute. Thank you. You guys were incredible. Thank you.